Now.
And you'll just lop off the beginning. Is that right? Okay. All right, Rob. Oh, Rob's coming in. Okay, great.
Okay.
Can't see you yet, Rob.
There we go.
There you go. Okay. So Rob, on Zoom, it doesn't look like we'll be able to minimize you. So if you'll just mute when you're not speaking, and we'll just still be able to see you. That's all.
All right. So shall we start again?
Let's start again. Katie's already started recording it. So let's go ahead and start.
Hi, I'm Rob Prince. I'm with the Center for Freedom and Justice in Colorado. Our little organization supports an organization by the same name, Center for Freedom and Justice, in Beit Umar in the West Bank in Area C, which is an area completely controlled by the Israeli military. Tonight's program is a continuation of interviews that we've been doing over the past year, and we're pleased and honored to have with us Katie Miranda. Katie was influenced, was struck by an event that also really touched me very deeply, and that was the murder of Rachel Corrie, an American woman who was doing solidarity work in Gaza and was run over by an Israeli bulldozer. And I think of her as a martyr for the nothing less than that of our peace movement. She gave her life for Palestinian rights and for Palestinian justice. So I want to welcome you, Katie. I'm going to turn the interview now over to my colleague, Jennifer Oti, and let's go on. Okay.
Thank you so much, Rob, for that introduction. Hello, everyone. As Rob said, I'm Jennifer Oti. I'm a member of Center for Freedom and Justice, Colorado. And of course, we support the town of Beit Umar in Palestine and just seek to raise awareness of everything that's going on for Palestinians over in the Middle East and around the world. One of our members actually found Katie through getting interested in her jewelry, and he's purchased some of it and is on her email list. So that's how we were able to connect with her. So we're very pleased to have Katie, you here with us tonight. So let's start off returning to what Rob was mentioning. You were a part of the International Solidarity Movement, the ISM. And can you tell us a little bit about, first, how you got involved with that movement, kind of what was going on in your life, and what sparked that interest in it?
Sure. So I first heard of the International Solidarity Movement in March of 2003, when one of its members, Rachel Corrie, was murdered by an Israeli soldier driving a Caterpillar bulldozer in Gaza while she was trying to block the demolition of a Palestinian home in Gaza. And this made the news, and I was really disturbed and upset about hearing about this. And her sacrifice of her life brought to light the work that the International Solidarity Movement was doing. And I wanted to learn more about what they were doing, because I wanted to know how she, she was a young woman from Olympia, Washington, how she ended up in Gaza doing this work. And the more I read about the International Solidarity Movement, the more interested I became in them. And this was right around the time that the Iraq War started. So I had been very involved in the anti-war movement, and I started learning about ISM, and they kept popping up in the news again every so often. And in 2005, I was looking for something to do on a Saturday in the Bay Area, and I was looking at an events calendar, and I saw that ISM was hosting a training in Berkeley. So I decided to go, and I had no idea what to expect. I had no intention of going to Palestine at the time, but I went to the training and I was completely blown away by what they were doing. They were riding in Palestinian ambulances, taking injured Palestinians to the hospital, because frequently Israeli soldiers would not let Palestinian ambulances through checkpoints. And they were going to the front of demonstrations against the apartheid wall and standing alongside the Palestinians at the demonstrations and demonstrating with them. And I was so inspired by what they're doing that I decided to sell my possessions and go to Palestine. I was living in San Francisco at the time. I was working as a freelance illustrator and graphic designer, and it was really unstable work. And I decided I had nothing to lose.
That's great. You know, I'm curious, there are so many things that happen that are bad around the world in so many different countries, and so many incredible movements that are out there, and organizations that go in and are able to stand in solidarity with other people. So, I mean, certainly this lady's death was a pivotal moment and traumatic and an absolute tragedy. But what was it about that particular thing that called to you, as opposed to other events around the world or other organizations that are seeking to help out?
Sure. Well, the other major event that was happening at the time, of course, was the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan. And I wanted to do something about it. I went to the demonstrations, but I couldn't see anything that I personally could do to make a difference there. Sorry, I've got cat hair on my face.
I wonder why.
Yeah. And I had gotten to know some of the activists from the training, a woman named Mary and a man named Paul, who told me what they had done when they were with ISM in Palestine. And so I actually had that personal connection with real people who could kind of show me the ropes and tell me what to expect. And I also had somewhat of a personal connection in that I'm of Jewish ancestry, and I really didn't like how the Israeli government was doing these horrific acts to Palestinians in the name of safety for the Jewish people. I didn't like that at all. And I wanted to do something about it. And I was young enough at the time where I didn't have anything to hold me here.
Right.
Here,
No,
meaning the United States.
yeah, no husband, no cat, no house,
No kid.
no kid. What a beautiful example, though, because so many of us, you know, we'll write our Congress people, we'll go to demonstrations, you know, we'll talk with other people, but you actually really did something, inserting yourself into the middle of it. And I also wanted to highlight what you said about having that personal contact with people who are involved. And so I think that just speaks beautifully to word to, you know, mouth to mouth communication, somebody knowing someone and inviting someone. So for all of our listeners out there, you never know whom you're going to influence with the good work you're doing. So when you were there, Katie, you know, with this horrific thing that happened and all these home demolitions, which are very common, continuing to today, did you ever feel that your life was threatened or have any really, really bad experiences there?
I had a lot of bad experiences, a lot of really horrific experiences. And whenever I say that, what's always going on in the back of my head is that, look, I was there for 3 years, and Palestinians have to deal with that every day of their lives. So I'm always conscious of that when I'm talking about it. I did feel my life was threatened a few times. There were a few riots in Hebron with Israeli settlers where they were throwing very large rocks at us. These were Israeli men and boys, and one of them, it was about this big. It hit me. Fortunately, it only hit me in the thigh. But if it had hit me in the head, I don't know what would have happened. So the riots were always very scary. One time I was going into Nablus with other members of the ISM, and we were trying to get into Balata refugee camp, which had just been invaded by Israeli soldiers. And we were going there to bring food and medicine to Palestinians because they were under curfew. They could not leave their houses. And we, as international volunteers, were allowed to be out on the street. So while we were walking towards the refugee camp, we were shot at by an Israeli tank while we were headed into the refugee camp. We were shot at with live ammunition.
Wow. Well, thank God that you're okay. And just from an average American citizen, thank you for everything that you did over there. And speaking of that, can you tell us more about your day-to-day life of what you were doing, what the main purpose was of your group, or some of the daily activities that you had?
Sure. Well, I spent about 9 months in the city of Hebron, and Hebron is a city of about 150,000 Palestinians and about 500 to 600 Israeli settlers. And these settlers are like the most ideologically extreme Israeli Jews I've ever seen. They believe that the land of Israel, and specifically the city of Hebron, was given to them by God, as it says in the Torah. But they believe that it's their religious duty to cleanse the city of its Palestinian inhabitants. And they are trying to do that by making the lives of Palestinians as absolutely miserable as possible. If anybody has ever gone on a tour through the old city of Hebron, they will know that Israelis have a settlement up above the souk.
Mm-hmm.
And there are these big nets up above the souk, above the street, that their purpose is to collect garbage that the Israeli settlers throw down into the souk. And it's absolutely disgusting. But these people have been very successful at harassing and threatening the Palestinian residents. So one of our duties, one of the reasons we are asked to be in the neighborhood, is to escort kids to and from school. So we did what was called the school run in the morning, and in the afternoon, we would walk with the kids to and from school to protect them from verbal and physical harassment from Israeli settlers who would sometimes throw rocks or spit or verbally abuse them. And so we would just get between the kids and the settlers and film them because they were less likely to, do bad things when we were filming them. Right. And we were also acting as human shields to protect the kids.
Wow. That is a very important duty. And what else were you doing during the day when you weren't escorting the children?
We were writing reports, like incident reports about what happened. Trying to, this was back in 2006. So it was like right when YouTube was just starting to get popular, but we had these little cassettes that would go in a camera, because of course this was like before smartphones.
Right.
And so we had to get these cassettes out of the camera, and somebody had to take them up to Ramallah, to our media office, where we had some kind of device that would digitize them and put them online. So this is all very complicated. And during the day, we would sometimes just monitor checkpoints. There's a very bad checkpoint in Hebron. It's called Checkpoint 56. When I was there in 2006 and 2007, it was very bad. When I went back in 2017, it was really, really bad. It was like twice as big, all kinds of surveillance equipment. And this is how Palestinians who worked in the city got to and from their neighborhood in Tel Rameda, which is where we lived. So they would harass teachers who were trying to get through this checkpoint to go to school, and they would just delay people, you know, on their daily commute. This was a footpath. There were no cars. So people would have to walk into the city and back out of the city to get to and from work and home. And they would just harass people. So we would monitor the checkpoint, try and negotiate with soldiers who were detaining people, try and find out if there was a reason, what was the reason, and just try to keep things moving a little bit. And Palestinian residents told us that when we were there, the checkpoints usually moved more quickly.
Wow. Do you think, from what you know of Beit Umar, and I know you were based in Hebron, Beit Umar is not that far, whether you know this directly or you can surmise, these things have been going on for years. Would you say that the situation is similar there, or do you have any other information about the area of the town that we work with?
I only went to Beit Omar once.
Okay.
I think it was in 2006 or 2007. So I don't really feel qualified to speak about what they're experiencing today. But what I will say is that I drove past Beit Omar in 2017 while I was visiting Palestine briefly. And I saw some soldiers on the roof of a Palestinian home, and I ended up doing a painting of that for Mondoweiss when I
Oh yes, I saw that painting. Yeah.
When I worked as a cartoonist for them, because that's the kind of thing that the news media will never report about it, because it's not dramatic, it's not clickbait, nobody, you know, died or got seriously injured. It's not interesting enough. But just imagine you come home to your house and there are soldiers from another country on your roof. You know, this isn't in Israel proper. This is in the West Bank.
Mm-hmm.
It's not an Israeli city.
Right.
And there are like soldiers on your roof, and that's just normal there. You know, it's so normal, it's not newsworthy. So I know they have a lot of problems with soldiers and settlers, but I'm not qualified to talk about it.
Okay. Yeah, I know I get angry when people throw their own trash in my trash bin, my Denver trash bin. So imagine, you know, I feel violated that people walked on my property, let alone having soldiers on my roof. And you make such an interesting point about the news media. In fact, just a couple days ago, you know, more Palestinians were attacked around Beit Umar. And I think, you know, we hear about that through the smaller sources, and you're not going to hear about it in the main US media. The mainstream, there's, even if somebody dies, oh, it's just another, you know, Israeli Palestinian problem. It's not big news, basically. So it's horrible what happens there. And like you said, it's become normal, and it shouldn't be. So from all of the work you did, obviously you protected children's lives, you helped at the checkpoints. I'm curious about these incident reports and all the footage you have. I kind of want to know about the takeaways from your time with the ISM, both in terms of, you know, what did you learn from it from an educational perspective? What might be motivating for people to know? And then I would also like to know if you feel that anything ever came of these incident reports, any direct improvement or anything.
Yeah, so I guess my biggest takeaway would be that one person can really make a difference in the lives of individual people. And even though we didn't achieve our goal of ending the occupation and restoring freedom to Palestinians, we did help a lot of individual people, whether that was giving somebody 3 hours of their lives back because they would have been detained at a checkpoint for 3 hours, or helping kids feel a little bit safer on their way to school, a little bit less traumatized. There was one situation where it's kind of a crazy story. But I think in the end, it really did help someone. One of my friends went to a demonstration in a West Bank village around Nablus. They were doing a direct action with some Israeli activists, where Israeli activists went there and they physically removed a roadblock that was preventing these Palestinians from leaving their village. And one of my friends, fellow activists, filmed this. He filmed the Israelis removing it. And shortly after that, he was arrested by Israeli soldiers for being at, quote, an illegal demonstration. And he did not want the soldiers to get that videotape. So he tossed it into the grass. And he called me as he was being arrested, and asked me if I could go get it. And I was about 2 hours away. I had never been to this place before. I hadn't even heard of this village. But I was asked by some other people in ISM, yeah, Katie, why don't you go try and find this videotape? Because a bunch of Palestinians were also arrested that day, and they were charged with removing the roadblock. So this videotape evidence would exonerate them. So I traveled with a small group. I think there were maybe 4 of us up to this village, and we just kind of followed my friend's directions about where it was. He said it was at the top of a hill in a field underneath an Israeli guard tower, on the right side of the road, and it was just in this grassy area. And he said it was near a bag of tomato flavored potato chips, like a potato chip wrapper. And so we started walking up this hill, and it was getting to be towards the evening, and we were intercepted by an Israeli army jeep, and they told us it was a closed military zone and we had to leave. So we just decided that we would leave the immediate area, but we weren't going to go home. What we ended up doing is we went into the village and we met a family. We sat around, chatted with them for a little while, and we waited till the soldiers were gone. And then we went back up the hill to try and find this videotape. By this time, it was getting pretty dark. And when we got to the place where my friend said he dropped the tape, it was kind of like our hearts sank, because it was right under this Israeli guard tower. We didn't know if they were in there. They said it was a closed military zone. And this grassy area was just covered with trash. So, I'm looking for this tomato flavored bag of chips in this field of grass full of trash. And we were just looking and looking and looking, and it was starting to get dark, and we were talking about maybe leaving. And then, by the grace of God, I just found the videotape.
Incredible.
Yeah, so that's an example, I think, of how one can make a difference in the lives of individual people. I also started a program to teach art to kids, kids who didn't have anything to do after school, because it's not really that safe to play out in the street, because there are soldiers out in the street and settlers out in the street. And particularly for the little girls, they really didn't go out in the street very much. So I taught art to kids after school. So yeah, that's my biggest takeaway, that one person really can make a difference.
That is definitely a motivational piece for me, because I know a lot of times I feel like I'm just spinning my wheels and is it making any difference? And you're right, it does. And not only did you teach them art, but I'm sure they appreciated just having your presence there with them and showing them that they're important and listening to them. So
Yeah,
speaking of art, oh yeah, go ahead.
oh, that was another really important part of our work, that it's not something that's really talked about that much, but it is really important to listen to Palestinians, because they're so cut off from the rest of the world. And I think it's really therapeutic and beneficial for them when they just have a listener that they can share their pain with. And the thing that almost all of them said to me was, please go back to your country and talk about what's going on here. And that's what I've tried to do.
Absolutely. And you've certainly done that through your art. I know another woman in our Beit Umar group was in Hebron and saw these kids behind the windows and they couldn't come out to play. And she asked, what she could do for them. And they said, just tell our story. And that's what you're doing through your art, Katie. How did you make that kind of that intellectual and that human connection now, once you've come back to the States, as using art as a vehicle for change and for supporting the Palestinian people?
Art is just what I've always done. I've always made art, and I make art about things that I'm interested in and things that inspire me and move me and things that disturb me. I'm very interested in Palestine. I'm very disturbed by Palestine. The steadfastness and the strength of the Palestinian people really inspires me. And I remember after COVID hit, shortly after COVID hit, somebody asked me, well, why don't you paint a picture about COVID? And I just thought, that doesn't inspire me. Doesn't inspire me at all. Artists just draw and paint about what inspires them.
But you also said it could be something that disturbs you. So as an outlet, can you talk about that?
I guess I was very inspired by Palestine because of my proximity to it. And I hoped that with my art that I could get people to think. I think that's what the job of an artist is, to get people to think. Writers and journalists are supposed to get people to think with their writing and their journalism. And I try to do that with my art.
So this is an education, a way of educating the public, right? Anyone who sees your art, really to question what this piece is about and what it means and where it came from and why. Is that?
Yeah, exactly. And I whenever I exhibit my art, I always have like a long explanation of what the reason was for me creating this piece, what the story is behind it.
Can you tell us a little bit about the art that you create? Just some examples of it. I've seen it, but not everyone has.
Yeah, in 2006, I'll just talk about one theme that I've done repeatedly. In 2006, I decided I wanted to paint a pietà on the apartheid wall. And this was an idea I'd gotten back in my head in 2004. And I just always wanted to do it. And so I got some acrylic paints and I went to the wall by Kalandia checkpoint and I painted a pietà. For those of you who don't know what that is, a pietà is a painting of Mary holding Jesus just after he was taken off the cross. And many, many artists throughout history have done a painting of this. But the most famous is a white marble sculpture by Michelangelo. So most people have seen a picture of that. So I did a Palestinian mother with her dead son. And then a few years ago, I was having an art exhibition at the Jerusalem Fund Center in Washington, DC, and I wanted to do a new painting for that. And so I actually did an oil painting of the same subject. It was a Palestinian mother in a hijab, like Mother Mary is always depicted in a hijab. And she's holding her son who was shot in the chest by a bullet.
Wow. And I know for many faith traditions, especially Christians, that holds deep meaning. And so for Palestinians of Muslim faith or whatever, to see that I can't imagine how meaningful that is for them to see that. It really evokes something deep, I can imagine. Yeah. And speaking about Islam, and we heard your call to prayer there. Katie, you talked before about how you come from a Jewish tradition and now you're Muslim. Can you tell us a little bit about your conversion, kind of what inspired you, and how your faith today motivates what you do?
Sure. So I became fascinated with Islam because I saw how much strength it gave to Palestinians, particularly in the city of Hebron, where I lived for about 9 months, because they were suffering terribly. And most of them managed to go through the day with a smile on their face. And when I would talk to them, they would say, Alhamdulillah, which means thank God. It's just a way of expressing gratitude. They would say, Alhamdulillah, I have my family, I have food on the table. And it took me a long time to figure out that their religion really gave them a lot of strength to get through the day. And I was also having my own personal struggles at the time. And I thought, well, if Islam can help them through this, then maybe it can help me too. I guess after I came back to the US, I decided to convert to Islam, and I just started making more art about Palestine and about Islam, because at the time, this was around 2008 when I came back, there was a lot of negativity in the media about Islam, and I think it was very misunderstood back then. I think it still is now. And I wanted to try to normalize Islam in the US the way Judaism is, considered a normal religion in the US.
So again, speaking, you're constantly speaking for other people. And trying to help them understand. Do you think your faith today inspires what you do? You said it gave people strength in Palestine, and what does it give you today for all your efforts that you're doing?
Well, in terms of art, or
your art and everything you do to speak out for the people that we both support, or anyone else you're supporting and helping.
Well, so when I was in Palestine, I decided I wanted to learn Arabic calligraphy because I absolutely love learning new art styles and new art techniques. So I studied with a Palestinian calligrapher named Ihab Thabit. And when I came back to the US, I decided I wanted to incorporate that skill into my artwork. And this was around the time that people were getting kicked off of planes for wearing like Arabic on t-shirts, or, reading Arabic books, or Arabs and Muslims were under a lot of suspicion at this time. And I just wanted to bring the beauty of Arabic calligraphy into the US, and kind of just
you can normalize it, right?
Yeah, the way like Spanish is normalized here. So I started incorporating it into jewelry. I just think Arabic calligraphy is just the most beautiful thing out there, one of them. And as an artist, I just really wanted to master it. It was a challenge, of course, and I like challenges. So yeah, I wanted to use it to introduce people to Islam as like a stepping stone, to talk about, like, oh, what does this mean? Oh,
Right.
what does it say? What language is it? And yeah,
Do you
I also happen to think that Islam is the solution for a lot of social problems here in the US. And I imagine a lot of people wouldn't want to hear about that, but I believe it's true.
Well, I think people need to respect other religions and see the good in them, because a lot of faiths have a lot of solutions if people are just willing to look into them. Just curious, do you speak Arabic?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
So one more question on Islam. I am curious, what is one thing that you would like to share about it that people should know? Because you're absolutely right. There's still a lot of fear about it or it being the other. So here's your microphone. What would you like to share with everyone?
Sure. Well, so one social problem that Palestine does not have, there are no homeless, and there is not a drug and alcohol problem there, to the degree that there is here. Yeah, sure, there are Muslims who drink, but it's really, really frowned upon. And so Islam really helped me straighten my life out. And this is kind of something that I think Americans really are not open to, but I'm going to say it anyways. Islam helped me get my priorities straight in my life, because in American society, for a woman to have a goal these days of getting married and having a family, that's sort of like considered quaint or old-fashioned. But that's what I really wanted. I wanted to get married and have a family. And you just don't say that when you go out on a date, unless you want the person to like never see you again. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I mean, it's like feminism 360. If women are truly free, then they should be able to do what they want, right? Whether it's have families or be a CEO.
Yeah, but it is what I really want. And of course, I also want to run a business. My art is my business. I wanted to have a career, and I wanted both. And that's what I wanted, especially after seeing Palestinian families. And in Islam, it's considered completely normal for a woman to want to get married and have a family. That's just what you do. So I think there's like way too much pressure on women in Western society to downplay wanting to have a family. And, when I was in my 20s, drinking and hard drug use was just like a lot of people in my peer group, that's what they did. And like after work, we would just all go to a bar, and a lot of people would just get shit-faced. And if you didn't get shit-faced after work, you get shit-faced on the weekend. And I always felt there was something wrong with that. And I didn't want that for my life. I tried it and I realized it was not for me. And of course, drug use and drinking are forbidden in Islam. So it really helped me, as I said, prioritize my life and help me straighten myself out.
Right. That's really important for people to hear that, because they see, the family values and just basic good ways for people to live their lives, good tenets of the faith. So we have about 10 more minutes. I want to shift gears. You have done an incredible number of interviews, Katie. I've had the pleasure of watching some of them, both when you interviewed others and when people have interviewed you. And you've interviewed some big players in the discussion around Palestinian issues. I'd like you to highlight some of these folks that you've had a chance to interview. Kind of what are your takeaways from your discussions with them? Maybe just a couple that you'd like to speak about.
So I was trying to think of how to answer this question before when I was going over your interview notes, because I've interviewed somewhere between 50 and 60 people.
Yeah,
And
so just pick one, no problem.
so I'm just gonna pick one. I'm gonna pick the person who had the biggest influence on me, and that was Sam Bahor. Sam is a Palestinian American businessman, and he has started an organization called America for a Vibrant Palestinian Economy. And his goal with his organization and his goal in terms of his activism is to strengthen the Palestinian economy. And after I got back from Palestine, I was pretty much done with like on the ground activism because I was just burnt out. I was traumatized. I had PTSD. And, you know, I just didn't want to go into a demonstration and get roughed up and do that anymore. So what I realized I could do is I could support the Palestinian economy. And this is an area that a lot of activists ignore or overlook or don't even think about because they're just focused on political activism or, you know, activism on the ground, which is fine. But we shouldn't ignore the fact that the Palestinian economy has been completely devastated by the occupation, and Palestinians who used to make a living, you know, through farming or through crafts or, you know, whatever, just about every industry in Palestine has been affected negatively by the occupation, whether it's checkpoints or land theft or, you know, bulldozing of buildings. So I started a nonprofit called Palbox, which delivers Palestinian products to your door 4 times a year. And one of the products is Palestinian olive oil. So this is
My favorite.
And you know, I have other products. They rotate. Sometimes it's chocolate covered dates. I have some of those here on the table. I was just
That's not
munching
fair.
on
You
them.
have to share with everyone.
Just munching on them before this interview. So there's that. There's za'atar, maftool, which is Palestinian couscous. My jewelry also comes in every box. Different item of jewelry in every box. So talking to Sam was like one of the inspirations for starting Palbox, and you can check out Palbox at palbox.org.
And can you repeat the organization that Sam is with? The audio went out, just so our viewers can hear it.
Oh, sure. It's called Americans for a Vibrant Palestinian Economy.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, one of the things we've been doing with our friends in Beit Umar is they're establishing a women's market so that women can sell local things and really give women some independence and bring some, you know, food sustainability and bring money back into their own economy. So that's fantastic that you're doing that as well, Katie. Any other takeaways just from talking to folks just in general that you've interviewed?
There are a lot of different perspectives and a lot of different ideas. And if people really want to get an education on Palestine, I'm a little embarrassed to say this, but they should listen to these interviews because I listened to I interviewed so many different people with so many different ideas, and there's something in there for everyone. I think when people come to the issue of Palestine, they have the opportunity to bring their own personal skills and abilities to the situation. And I think if somebody is looking for how to get involved, if they listen to these interviews, they'll figure out what the best way for them to get involved is, whether that's donating money or going to do activism on the ground or going on a tour or hosting a fundraiser for PCRF, locally, the Palestine Children's Relief Fund, all kinds of ideas. And people can access the interviews. It's a podcast called Palestine Solidarity. And if you just start at the beginning, you can listen to them on your commute to work.
Absolutely. Or they can start a Palbox program. You never know. But yeah, just knowing all the great work.
Subscribe to Palbox.
Subscribe, even better. Don't reinvent the
Yeah.
wheel. But yeah, just knowing everything that's out there, so many different ways to help out, which actually leads me to one of my last questions is, we're always particularly interested in young people. You mentioned you started off when you were younger. Obviously, it's a little bit easier there if you do choose to sacrifice your entire life to go help out, if you don't have a house and other things to weigh you down. But
Yeah.
Why should the youth get involved? How can they get involved? Great idea about just listening to the interviews. They will hear that angle that will inspire them, as happened to you. But just thoughts for our viewers about how to get involved, especially young folks these days.
So I want to be inclusive of older folks too, because a good number of our volunteers were retired people. It's sort of skewed kind of like under 35 and then like over 60, because everybody in the middle was, had families or kids or whatever. So there are lots of opportunities for retired folks to get involved too. And they were some of our best activists, because they would talk to soldiers like they would talk to their grandkids. And sometimes the soldiers would listen to them more than they would listen to somebody closer to their own age.
For sure.
So I'll just list some organizations. I'm not really super up to date about what's going on there right now, but I will list some organizations that I know of and some other ones that I just found on the web. So I'm not endorsing any of them, but Middle East Children's Alliance is based in Berkeley, and they do a lot of great work. They do clean water projects, not just in Palestine, but in, I think, Lebanon and Syria, and stuff for kids. So if you're into kids and helping kids, they're a good one. Palestine Children's Relief Fund serves Palestinian children who are sick or injured in such a way that they cannot get the help that they need in Palestine. So they will fly a kid out of Palestine to the US to get medical treatment in the US. And another thing they do, and I know this because my neighbor did this, she's a pediatric cardiology nurse, and she went to Gaza to train other Palestinian nurses and teach them. So if you're in the medical field, PCRF is a great organization to get in touch with. Tours are a great starting point. So if you just want to learn more about the situation through something that's a bit more structured than ISM, you can go on a tour. There's tours given by ex-Israeli soldiers. The organization is called Breaking the Silence. They give excellent tours of Hebron, which is where I went on one of their tours in Hebron, and they give the tours from the perspective of Israeli soldiers who kind of deeply regret what they were doing and are deeply questioning their role as ex-soldiers in Israeli society. There's also something called Green Olive Collective, which gives tours. I know nothing about them though. And then there's something called Alternative Tours, which is put together by an organization in Jerusalem called the Alternative Information Center. there's an organization called Playgrounds for Palestine, another one if you're into kids. But if you listen to my interviews, you'll probably get inspired too.
There's that wonderful organization, Colorado Center for Freedom and Justice, right?
Yeah.
Designing that. These tours, I've seen ones that are virtual. The organizations you listed, do some of them have virtual tours as
I
well?
don't
Do you have
know.
an idea? Okay, that's fine. People can look them up and find out. Okay. One last question, Katie. So if someone came to you and said, you know, you've been really involved, why should I get involved? Why? What would you say to them?
I would say don't get involved if you have to ask yourself why.
Interesting.
I think it's,
Well, and I don't mean it as a defensive. I mean, like, you're saying, tell me more. Like, what do you offer me of why? What? But I also see what you're saying. They should
I
know.
think most people who get involved, it's because they can't not get involved. The pain of not being involved is too great. So if you're kind of on the fence, like, why should I help out? Then I don't think you've been moved to the point where you feel compelled to do something. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. You know, you might have interests in other areas. But I think in the end, I got back way more than I gave. And it's one of the best decisions I made in my life.
And I'm so glad you did, because you've inspired me tonight. I'm sure you've inspired so many people. Just some takeaways I have are just you know, how one individual person can make such a huge difference, and just that ability of people to connect. If you know somebody, you never know that your interest in something can inspire them, and the ability to listen to what people say, what's going out there, listen to these interviews. You never know how you'll be moved. And also the very last thing you said, if you have to ask, then that pain hasn't touched them deeply enough, and maybe they have other things they need to be doing, other priorities.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Katie. This concludes the formal part of our interview, and I want to turn it over back to my colleague Rob Prince to see if there are any follow-up questions, just for a couple minutes.
First, hi. Thanks so much, Katie. It's so interesting listening to you, so moving listening to be quite frank. As somebody who came to this issue also from a Jewish background after the 1967 war, which I happened to see from a rather unusual vantage point. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Tunisia at the time, so I saw it from that angle and came back and got involved. And I can never, for as long as I'm here, I'm going to do, you know, what little I can in support of Palestine, period. Having said that, I just have a couple of follow-up questions. We don't have to go on very long, but I'm curious to know, in your thinking, do you see any changes in US policy towards the Palestinians over the nearly 20 years that you've been involved in this issue?
So when I first got involved, I'll just share a quick anecdote, and I'm sure you can relate, Rob, but Palestine was almost like a four-letter word in quote, polite society, whatever that means. And it was spoken about in very hushed tones, and you were often scolded, especially if you were speaking about it to American Jews. I know I was, but now you can talk about it much more freely, which is great. And there are members of Congress who are talking about it much, much more freely, which I also think is great. We need to get more members of Congress talking about it freely and actually not just talking, but actually doing something. Because I think some of these members of Congress, you know, I mean, this is politicians in general, and I'm very jaded about politicians lately. They'll do and say anything to get elected. And I think some people have realized that if they talk about Palestine, their voter base likes that. But what remains to be seen is, are they going to actually commit themselves to voting to support Palestinian rights in the US? You know, we're still in this pandemic, and we're still giving 3 billion plus per year to Israel. And we have this coronavirus pandemic, and we also have a drug epidemic, which, you know, I live in Portland, and Portland has been devastated by drugs. So, you know, I'm wondering, why are we giving so much money away to Israel when we have massive social problems here that need to be dealt with? And remains to be seen whether anybody in Congress is actually brave enough to really take it on, not just talk about it.
Yeah. Well, my sense too is that the situation on the ground, if one could use that term, is more open than it was in the past, and that's the work, in part, of people like yourself, who've opened that door. All right, I have a question, and if you don't feel comfortable with it, that's fine. But it's just been on my mind. So I'm a very secular Jewish person. I haven't been in a synagogue since my bar mitzvah, and I have no intention of, you know, I'm not interested in the religious part of it. But I've studied and know, I fair to say, I have a good handle on Jewish history. At least I'd like to believe that. And one of the things that I'm wondering about, in my mind, is there really a possibility of de-Zionizing Judaism? And I wonder if you've thought about that, and if you have any reflections on that. My own sense is, of course, it's not around the corner. All right, pretty obviously.
Well,
but I'm just wondering if it can be done, you know?
I mean, there wasn't Zionism before. I mean, as you know, Zionism wasn't part of Judaism before, you know, the 19th century. So Judaism existed without Zionism for, you know, centuries. And I know there's a movement, particularly amongst, you know, my generation, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z, where they're growing up learning about Palestine, and they want nothing to do with Zionism. So I think that it is possible that Zionism may die out, just because it's an ideology and a belief that is clung to very fervently by baby boomers, silent generation, of course, you know, some Gen Xers and millennials too, but the ratio between anti-Zionists and Zionist Jews is shifting in favor of anti-Zionist Jews, the younger people get. So I think it may die out.
Okay.
Can I ask a question? And I don't know if you feel qualified to speak to this, but do you think Christianity could ever be de-Zionized?
Well, that's a great question.
Especially Christians in the US. I mean, they're just as bad.
Well, you know, the Christian Zionist organizations, from my very limited perspective and knowledge on them, again, it's a generational thing. A lot of the leaders are baby boomers. So I don't know if if Zionism dies out, then Christian Zionism is going to go with it.
Okay. Well, I think that's enough. Really appreciate your comments and your thoughts and your life journey, and of course your solidarity with Palestine.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you, Katie. And just as a closing, again, for everybody on who's aware of CFJ, please continue to support us and the work we do. Visit our website, cfjcolorado.org, and we will post copies of this presentation on YouTube and Facebook. And Katie Miranda, thank you so much. Oh, and I think you wanted to mention something about a coupon for your jewelry. And after you do that, we'll close.
Sure. Yeah. If people want to check out my jewelry and get 15% off, I have a coupon, which is KM15, KM15. You can use it at katiemiranda.com. It's just my name, Katie Miranda.
Great. Well, thank you again so much, Katie. This concludes our program, and everyone have a great night.
Katie, come visit us in Colorado.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.